internal. Something worked when I clicked. Oh, there we are. Oh my God. I just clicked randomly on different settings and now here I am. Well, that was a little bit of a disaster in the beginning, guys, but I deserve a nice tea. Thank you, Ukraine Matters. You guided me towards the right buttons. I clicked something that apparently worked. So can you guys hear me and see me? Perfect. And everybody can hear me? Perfect. Awesome. Yeah, so I apologize. This was a little bit of a disaster in the beginning, but we learn through difficult and challenging moments. So happy to see all of you. Wow, there's a lot of people. It's very surprising. Yeah, so welcome. It's the very first live stream. I was just thinking of doing an open Q&A session, just going through different questions that you might have on everything related to the Ukraine, war for independence, and yeah, and I'm going to try to answer as best as I can. I have two screens on, so I apologize if I turn my head left and right, just because I look at the chat section as well. So I'm going to be able to um, answer your questions as best as I can. So yeah, let's just to break the ice. Germany is the big topic today, or last couple of days. Their lack of willingness to give out the Leopard 2s has been very, very disappointing to say the least. And I'm just going to talk a little bit about that. Then I'm going to look at some of your comments. And thank you all. I see there's a lot of people from United Kingdom, Glasgow, Saskatchewan. Great, a lot of Ukraine people in Saskatchewan. A lot of Ukraine people moved in the early 1900s to the prairies of Canada. By the way, they really helped build all these communities up in Alberta and Saskatchewan and Manitoba. So yeah, I'm just looking at all the people that are writing in the comment section where they're from. It's really interesting. Cambodia. I did not know that there were people from Cambodia that were watching. So yeah. So first of all, I just want to quickly talk about Long Island, Florida, Quebec. Ben oui, Quebec. Yes, I do speak French as well. For those that have been hinting or wondering if I'm actually a French speaker as well. I do speak French as well. So bonjour à tous mes amis québécois as well. Tanzania. Whoa, crazy. Very happy to see all guys. So just as a topic to break the ice, for me, I wanted to talk a little bit about Germany and my disappointment at the way they've been handling things the last year. Now, I know there's a lot of news now that are coming out that they're saying that Germany is officially going to be, in the next couple of days, there's an announcement that Germany is officially going to give the green light for countries to give the Leopards. But I just think that I've been very disappointed the way that things have been handled by the current government of Scholz. And that kind of gave me some time to a little bit reflect on to as to why Germany has been doing this. Why is Germany just kind of always tiptoeing around the question of should they be helping Ukraine or not, right? It's always really reluctant on their side to do this. And for me, I think it really one of the main factors, the fact that Germany is coming from a legacy of post-World War II guilt, right? They've obviously been portrayed as the evil country that started it all in World War II, that committed atrocities. And I think that Scholz, the current German leadership, still feels it. They don't want to be painted as a military government that's been assisting Ukraine. Um, and obviously the Russian propaganda works really well in that regard, right? They're trying to portray and send messages to Berlin that you guys are fascists, you're, helping neo-Nazi government regime in Ukraine, and thus you're fascists, you never changed. And that guilt trip really works, especially within the German government. Now, as I've said, I have no doubts that depression's been building up and that eventually for the next couple of days or weeks, Germany is going to finally give the green light to other countries to at least transfer the Leopards to Ukraine. But there was a chance. It was a chance for Germany to really portray themselves on the 21st century in the history books as a country that was um, that truly, changed completely, right? From a very dark history in the 20th century, right? Germany, uh, that came out a loser twice in World War One and World War Two, now had the chance, a very beautiful chance to portray themselves as one of the biggest supporters of Ukraine. And now it's kind of pretty much gone. Be forever written in the history books as this uncertain country or government that didn't do or wasn't decisive enough in helping Ukraine. No matter what happens, I think that's an unfortunate little asterisk that they're going to be putting on Germany, sadly. But I don't want to downplay the fact that Germany has been helping Ukraine in a great manner in terms of its equipment. If you look at the top military donations that Ukraine's been getting, Germany is in the top five. So still German weapons and the German support is invaluable, but it's just unfortunate the way that it's all been handled the past year. Could have been forgiven in the very first couple months, but now we're heading to almost a year, unfortunately, into this war with Russia and Ukraine, and Germany's still, indecisive. Uh, so some of your comments are saying that Germany could switch its guild to Poland, Belarus, and Ukraine. Those countries are a blind spot. Germany will send the tanks, or at least stop of those that do. Don't worry. Yeah, and again, I'm not throwing shade at the German people. I'm assuming that there's some German people that watch me. I know that you guys know what's happening. You fully support Ukraine, but is the German government is just it's been a little bit disappointing, as I've said, the way they've been handling things. Um, but as they're going to come through, there's no doubt about it. But it's just unfortunate that it took them so much time. And look how far we've come. It started with 5,000 helmets, and now we're talking about Leopard 2. So there is some sort of positive progress on Germany's side for sure. And yeah, let's not downplay the fact that Germany, ever since this war started, had a lot of economic ties with Russia. It's been a very beneficial relationship for the Russian resources, the gas, the petrol, even the coal. They've been buying it at heavy discounts from Russia, and so I think it's also part of the fact that they're worried about their energy supply to this day, and so they're kind of still wondering. And I've also said it in some videos in my previous videos that Germany can see a Russian victory, a world where Russia wins against Ukraine, right? They can totally visualize that. But visualizing a world where Ukraine wins is very difficult for some of these countries, specifically Germany. They have trouble understanding how the outlook is going to look like when Ukraine is going to win this battle. And I truly believe that. You guys know me, I really am a firm believer that Ukraine is going to win this no matter what. So, Canada has 100. Yeah, honestly, Canada, it's been a disappointment. I looked many years ago, just kind of a quick summary look at what Canada had in terms of military assets, and 100 Leopards for a country the size of Canada is pathetic. It's I don't know what our Canadian Minister of Defense is doing, but 100 is clearly not enough. If your solution for defense is the United States, I think you need to go back on a drawing board because if anything, this horse taught us is that countries need to become much more stronger in their defense industries. And, Canada has really been pathetic the last 20 years. And coming from a Canadian that really cares about our defense industry and our defense, you can talk to a lot of Canadian soldiers and they can pretty much tell you rundown of how poorly run down the Canadian Army is. Obviously, there's a lot of things to fix. Yeah, we don't fight land wars, but yeah, I agree. Canada's their primary mission is not to fight or, to be the global police, but I still think we need to ensure a great capacity to defend ourselves. And 100 Leopards won't even cover a hundredth of our territory. So, we need more weapons for sure for Canada. Yeah, we don't really have any aggressive neighbors, Georgie. I agree with that. But Russia has been, since 2007, I remember Russia's been using submarines in the Arctic to prove that northern Arctic is part of Russia. So Russia also has ambitions for the Arctic to be there. So I think that there is also a threat from Russia albeit not as high as it used to be. Obviously, because Ukraine has pretty much disposed a lot of the combat capacity of Russia, but no matter what, you still need to make sure that you have enough to at least, if anything was to happen, to defend yourself. Yeah, exactly. Hopefully, there's not going to be a Russian attack. I definitely seriously doubt that they're going to try to do a massive amphibious assault in the northern part of Canada. They'll be suicidal, but we'll see. So we piggyback on the US and its mighty military. This we feel extremely safe. I too wish we had more to give. Yeah, it's always been a doctrine. Canada actually was much more stronger many decades ago. They created a lot of programs, and World War II was, great, powerful country that helped, obviously with D-Day and many other wars in World War II, battles in World War II. So we kind of fell off, but anyways, that's another topic. I kind of went on a side tangent on Canada. Um, so that started with Harper. He didn't care for anyone, let alone the military. Yeah, Harper was conservative, right? So there was a lot of austerity measures, especially during the global financial crisis. The military was one of the very first things to be cut, right? The budget. Then Afghanistan, a lot of the soldiers came back, so there was not much more. There wasn't many. There wasn't like a necessity to grow the military or expand the military. And yeah, now I think the F-35s is what Canada went for instead of the Gripens. There was the two choices, either the F-35 Raptors or the Gripen from Saab. And so Canada went for the more expensive American jet fighters as well. But I think it makes sense as well because the US is right beside Canada, so it's going to be a lot easier for Canada to maintain them if necessary. But it's a much more expensive choice for sure. Yeah, Denmark sending all their howitzers. Canada should send whatever we have. Sounds stupid, but Abrams is too fragile for Ukraine. Yeah, I've heard also in terms of the Abrams tanks, they're heavy tanks. They're very heavy tanks. And they're very technologically advanced. And so I think logistically speaking, it would be much more tougher for Ukraine to have Abrams than Leopards. Leopards, there's dozens of countries all around Europe that operate them. They have the logistical lines and also the industries within the country assume to repair them, which would be a lot of, that's what's an evident choice for Ukraine to have Leopard 2s instead of the Abrams, because Abrams, there's only a few countries that operate them, but mostly it's just the United States. And so it's just, the parts and the repair and the maintenance, it would be just a headache, I think, for the Ukrainians to operate them. Also, the fact that Ukraine has black soil, right? The Rasputitsa, as they may call it, is obviously a phenomenon that exists, um, in Eastern Europe, mostly Belarus, Ukraine, and parts of Russia. And an Abrams tanks that weighs like, dozens and dozens of tons, would just collapse, especially in the spring offensive. I just don't see them being very effective. So I think that a lighter weight tank, and that's why, as I've said, I really love the CV90s. The CV90s from Sweden, the Bradleys, they're light infantry vehicles that have very powerful cannons that are capable of destroying the Soviet era armor. And so I think to me, that's what Ukraine should be receiving more of. Leopard 2s are great, but I think CV90s, Bradleys, what else? Anything that is infantry fighting vehicles that are modern, Ukraine should be getting way more of those because they're much more maneuverable, they're faster, they can carry a lot more Ukrainian soldiers to the front lines, and they can give very great military support at destroying, Soviet armor as well. 55 tons, is that what the Abrams weighs? Yeah, the Challenger 2 are all about 64 tons. Yeah, it's massive. It's massive. Wouldn't overcrafts be good to carry supplies? Not really sure about that. I mean, carrier supplies if they're really behind the front lines, but I'm not really sure that's a great idea. If I'm not mistaken, they're the ones that have like inflatable bases. So a good, bullet in there and they're pretty much useless from what I understand. But Bradleys, I love that. Ukraine's getting 110 Bradleys, 109, but the Bradleys are going to be a game changer for you for Eastern Ukraine. Mostly because Ukraine now can form multiple battalions with that, at least 3 to 4 battalions with the Bradleys and the CV90s. And Estonia today also announced that they're giving up all their 155 millimeter howitzers. That's going to be so exciting. Cannot wait for that. Honestly, that's going to be great. And it shows furthermore that the Baltics understand what's at stake here. The Baltics have the most to lose because they understand Putin's ambitions do not stop at Ukraine only. He has made it very clear that he wants to go to Estonia, to Lithuania, to Latvia. These are the first ones, right? The post, the ex-Soviet countries are the first ones that are kind of the Putin crosshairs. So yeah, Abrams can run on diesel, gasoline, jet fuel, kerosene. Yeah, that's a huge, huge plus. For sure. The fact that you can use different types of fuel to run these tanks. But yeah, it's also an issue of, Ukraine now is operating so many different vehicles from so many different countries, right? And the training that is required, it's just mind-boggling. The Ukrainian soldiers now have to go to the United States to train how to use the Bradleys. I think a week ago it was announced, or 2 weeks ago, that they've came to Oklahoma City to prepare the training with the Bradleys. Now, to United Kingdom, how to use their systems, their Challenger 2s. So it's also a logistical headache for the Ukrainian soldiers, for sure. Yeah, I mean, I'm not gonna be screaming shame on Germany. I just think it's mostly the government, which is disappointing. I'm not gonna say shame on the German government. It's a disappointment the way that they've been handling the Leopard question, for sure. Yeah, Zaluzhny did say that at the minimum, Ukraine needed 300 tanks and 500 infantry fighting vehicles to mount a very successful counteroffensive on all, or at least being able to mount a counteroffensive. But if you guys remember, he actually said that to really be effective, it would need to be about 1,000 tanks and close to that number as well, 1,500 or also 1,000 infantry fighting vehicles to really mount a very, very successful counteroffensive. It's a war of attrition, and Georgie actually mentioned that. I think one of your community posts, but the Russian army is not good. It's just very large. It's very long. It has thousands and thousands of howitzers, thousands of old Soviet armor, of BMPs, of BTRs, of tanks. Right? They're just massive in terms of numbers. And so to destroy this this massive amount of weaponry, you need the same amount of weapons on the Ukrainian side. So Ukraine is just getting just enough to defend itself and perhaps mount some small counteroffensives in certain areas, but it's not enough to mount a massive counteroffensive that will draw back the Russian army way back to the Russian borders, right? The goal here is to destroy the Russian army and push them outside of Ukraine completely. That includes Crimea. No negotiations before that. That's my opinion, and I think that that opinion is shared among many other Ukrainians. You just have to look at the polls in Ukraine to see that the majority of the Ukrainian people want Russia to be completely gone from all Ukrainian territories, including Crimea. Before that, there's no negotiations because all negotiating attempts are going to be a sort of like a way for Russia to rearm itself, right? We've already seen two of these examples in 2014 and 2015 with the Minsk agreements. What did that bring? Nothing. It just gave more time for Putin to rearm himself, and launch a massive invasion in Ukraine since 2022. So exactly. The goal here is limiting Russian combat power and weakening it for regime change. Yeah, I mean, that's the main goal. And hopefully, a destruction of the regime, and then because the Russians and the Russian army is going to be so weak that it's going to really influence a change of governance in Russia that would perhaps and hopefully turn into more pro democracy way. I mean, at the same time, Russia's been very surprising in terms of their lack of action. So we'll have to see in terms of that, but at least weakening them enough so that there's an internal revolt within the Russian population that's going to demand changes, and it's going to be an opportunity for the Russian people to really truly reform themselves. But we'll have to see. Again, what has been the most surprising and one thing I've really underestimated in this war, I've said it multiple times in my videos, but it was the fact that I just didn't want to believe that Russians would accept this war to be to go on for months, right? I thought really that, at the latest by summer, right, the Russian people would revolt. They would do something about this war. They couldn't accept the fact that the Russian army is waging this bloody, barbarous war against the Ukrainian people, right? Literally committing terrorist acts all throughout Ukraine by bombing civilians, civilian buildings, and civilian infrastructure, that they couldn't allow this to happen. And I underestimated them. Now is that the Russians are okay with this war. They're okay to die for Putin's ambitions. And I'm also fully conscious of the fact that there's many Russian people that are also fighting for Ukraine. They're fighting for democracy, but they're a minority. And I would put them, if I was to pull out statistics, perhaps 20%. 20% of Russians truly want change, truly are doing something about it or trying to do something about it within Russia. But unfortunately, about 70 to 80% of the Russians either don't care or fully support this war against Ukraine. And so I don't know what to expect from the Russian people anymore. And the thing is that we should not be expecting anymore any internal revolt from Russia or some sort of, a massive protest from the Russian people to overrun the government and overturn Putin's power. It's just not going to happen anymore. That is now a pipe dream. So, me too. But as others have said, it takes Russia 500,000 dead to walk away most wars. I seriously doubt that. Actually, I think that it will take Russia. Russians are going to accept even 1 million deaths, even 2 million deaths. At this point, I'm sorry to say it, but they're just ground meat, and they've accepted that fate. You just have to look at the way all these videos, I'm not sharing them with you guys, but on Twitter and other forums that are being shared, these constant waves of attacks in Solidar, in Bakhmut, now in Zaporizhia. Right now, the Russians have tried to pull off an offensive in Zaporizhia in the last couple of days. I didn't make a video, but perhaps tomorrow I will, where they're trying to now go to Orikhiv, and Orikhiv is not too far away from the city of Zaporizhia. And this was literally a whole squad or a platoon. So platoon is usually about 50 soldiers, 25 to 50 soldiers, just literally running in the middle of the Ukrainian steppes in Zaporizhia with no vehicles, no backup, just them running towards Ukrainian positions, and they were okay with that, right? If I was a soldier, that's in that situation, I would have been like, "What the hell am I doing? We need to overrun this commander that gave us this order to go towards the Ukraine positions. It's a suicide sentence, right? It's a suicide mission." And I would not underestimate the willingness of Russians to die for Putin. At this point, I think even 500,000 dead, they would still be okay to continue with this battle, with this war. Yeah, I agree with you, Joe. It's sick-minded how people can just accept the amount of death and more. But Putin, we have to give him a very, very big props because he's groomed the Russian population for decades for this war. Now, if we're transitioning to another topic, and that is the topic of the Panzer systems that have been appearing on multiple buildings in Moscow and other urban areas in Russia. It's another, and many of you guys have commented in my previous videos, my previous video, that yeah, this was it's a propaganda way, it's a propaganda thing for the Russian government, so they can just kind of show to their population, look, we're not fighting NATO, it's not Ukraine anymore, it's NATO. NATO is expecting to send weapons, missiles, hovering across Moscow. We need to get prepared. Obviously, there's no intention of hitting Moscow in the first place. I think we all understand that that's not in the plans of Ukraine nor NATO. But Putin has been grooming his people for so many decades, right? At this, existential threat of NATO at the borders of Russia, and that Russia's independence and Russia's power is at stake here because NATO is literally installing bases at the borders of Russia. And truly, the majority of Russian people are truly afraid of that, right? They truly believe it, and thus why they perhaps think that this is a holy war against NATO. So they're willing to die. They're willing to die because they've been brainwashed in the head that this is not a fight against Ukraine, but a fight against NATO. And this is obviously Putin's biggest dream. He's very angry right now because why is he still calling it a special military operation? Why? Because he doesn't want to admit that this is a full-scale war with Ukraine that he cannot win, that he just simply has been at a standstill for the last couple months, and they've been losing since September. Right? They've lost in Kharkiv a huge amount of territory, in Kherson, um, and he just doesn't want to admit the fact that this is um, he's losing a battle against Ukraine alone, right? Of course, Ukraine gets Western help, but it's the Ukrainian people's will that is keeping them in this game and keeping them in a massive, with these massive counteroffensives that are very successful. And so it's for his, it's his dream to kind of turn this into a global full-scale war, saying, well, at least, we lost against NATO, right? Um, so it's very interesting to see that. Head of VDV fired for not using them as cannon fodder. Yeah, I didn't. I heard some news about a new VDV commander being installed by Putin. Again, the shuffling of commanders is, as I've said, it's like, blaming the head coach for a sports team firing a head coach when it's clearly the issue is just the way that your team is structured, things are not aligned properly. The fact is that everybody right now within the structure of the Russian military is just incapable. They haven't built the correct structure. It's still remnants of the Soviet era, and Russia's not adjusted to modern warfare, unfortunately. And so why they're betting, which is bring me up to the next topic, why they're betting on just meat waves, right? They're betting on manpower and quantity over quality, right? So that's what Putin now is putting all his chips in, is just overrunning all Ukrainian positions with thousands and thousands and thousands of mobilized soldiers. And there's no doubt in my mind that there's going to be another mobilization by the end of this winter for sure. Um, the 100K that left Russia will just wait until it's over, then go home again. Uh, I'm not sure if you mean about the mobilized or the people that left Russia following the mobilization. Yeah, good thing for Russian corruption for sure. I mean, that has been, you know, indirectly helping Ukraine. But it's either way, it's not luck. It's the way that, ex-Soviet countries ran. Even in Ukraine, let's also want to be realistic. In Ukraine, there's still a lot of issues with corruption, even within the military. There was a massive scandal that came out a couple of days ago in the Ukrainian military defense, where they were giving out the contracts for food packages and military rations to the soldiers, and these contracts were given, and they were paid but at very very heavy prices. So something like a bag of potatoes, which would cost a certain price, they were inflated by 300% within, and they were paid by the Ukrainian government. Everything was inflated because a few people wanted to profiteer from this war within Ukraine. So Unfortunately, it's a legacy from the Soviet Union, where corruption was rampant, and very few people wanted to take advantage of millions and millions of people. But unfortunately, in Ukraine, there is this now. This war is really pushing for massive reforms within Ukraine. This war, I don't think the Ukrainian people are going to be accepting or just sort of sweeping under the rug any type of corruption ongoing. I think that now the people are going to be demanding massive, massive changes and very quick changes. Yeah. Well, it's one thing to find out, but it's another thing how you're going to react to it. And hopefully the reaction is going to be appropriate to the crimes that were committed. Because I find it's disgusting the fact that some Ukrainian people are trying to profiteer from this war. Um, I think some prison sentences will need to be given if, obviously once this investigation is done and the people that were in charge of this were are to be found out. Uh, yeah, exactly. Well, there's corruption everywhere for sure. The degree is all that changes. Obviously, corruption is everywhere, even in Canada, in the United States, but for sure in the ex-Soviet countries, it's rampant to this day, right? It takes generations of people to really change that. It's not instant, and hopefully in Ukraine, once this war is over, this process is going to be speeding up a lot faster since 2014. There's already been great reforms within Ukraine, but Ukraine needs to move forward much more quicker. Now is the time to do it and really weed out all these old farts, as I might call them, all these ex Soviet or these Soviet politicians that still are within Ukraine politics. I think they really need to be ousted. They have no more place within Ukraine, in my opinion. And obviously, yeah, it doesn't help that Russia is our neighbor or is the neighbor of Ukraine. Obviously, they've been grooming and they've been buying out a lot of the politicians, leaders within the military. Why do you think that the south of Ukraine was so easily taken by Russia? Because so many commanders and leaders were bribed by Russia, and now they fled to Ukraine, or I should say to Russia. All these people that were responsible for the defenses in south of Ukraine were bought up by FSB agents, the GRU, right? There was a massive operation from the Russian side. Thankfully, not all of them were bribed, but it's another unfortunate thing. I don't think Russia would have been in the position they're in if these leaders, these commanders, were not bought by Russia to just to not defend south of Ukraine. Do Ukrainians have enough men to face many losses? Yes, Ukraine has enough manpower. The issue here is the leadership. We often paint a light about the Ukraine fires, as always correct. They're always right, but there's still a lot of issues within the Ukrainian leadership, the Ukrainian command in the military, where there was a scandal with the Foreign Legion in Severodonetsk and Lysychansk back in the summer, where they were given suicide missions by their commanders. They were just being told, "Yeah, go ahead and go fight these Russian soldiers somewhere in the outskirts of Severodonetsk." And this, obviously brought upon massive casualties within the Foreign Legion. And so there's still to this day a huge issue with how to train these commanders so they don't give out these suicide missions. But obviously, it's not rampant. It's not as rampant, let's say, as in Russia with the Russian military. But it's a long process, guys. It's not easy, and especially the fact that Ukraine was obviously didn't have time to readjust properly since February and to fully modernize. It's an issue. Uh, yeah, 44 million with brains, I might add. Smiley face. 5% of NATO equipment has gone to Ukraine. Not a single airplane. Not one tank a year into the war. Well, of course, airplanes, jet fighters are necessary, but let's not forget the fact that the Russians also have air defense systems. So you can have 100 F-16s if you want, but the Russians still have their S-300s. They have their very effective air defense systems in place to stop these jet fighters. So for both sides, there's no air superiority at this point, because to have air superiority, you also need to make sure that you destroy um, all the air defense systems. Thankfully, Ukraine has the HARMs, the AGM HARMs, which are obviously missiles that can find and destroy any air defense systems. But again, I don't think that we should be, putting too much of a emphasis on jet fighters. I don't think that's what's going to be, um, the game changer for this war, for Ukrainian victory, for sure. But yeah, I have no doubts that, of course, Ukrainian and it takes so much time for to learn how to operate a jet fighter. I mean, Denis Davidov, can be pretty much one of the main guys that can acknowledge that it takes years for a pilot to be trained. Here, you're demanding Ukrainian pilots to train within less than 6 months. F-16s. I wouldn't consider them to be so advanced, but they're still complicated pieces of equipment, and it takes a lot of time to learn how to fly one. I personally don't really have a lot of knowledge on jet fighters, but I assume that it would take between 6 months to a year to really learn all the ropes, how to operate them. Hello, Chris. Love your reporting. Thank you, Nicolas. Really appreciate it. So yeah, do you think Poland, Finland will give enough leopards? They've committed to it. If I'm not mistaken, everything is gradual. You see, it's not like Ukraine is going to get 100 Leopard tanks tomorrow if Germany gives the green light. I don't think so. Perhaps 100 with all the countries combined, but it's very gradual, right? First, they send a company of tanks, so about 12 to 14, and then a month in, it's going to be another company. So I think that it's not going to be like in one shot they're going to give everything they have. It's also a way for Ukraine to test these leopards out to see if they're actually going to be effective. So we'll see. We'll see. It takes 19 hours of maintenance for every 1 hour in the air. Yeah, for sure. There's also the maintenance hours. Ukraine needs these, like for sure. Ukraine needs the parts to be able to repair these jet fighters. They're so complicated. There's so much maintenance necessary for these jet fighters that that's another question that's going to be that we need to answer, is how is Ukraine going to be able to repair and maintain these jet fighters within Ukraine, right? So it's also logistically speaking, it's going to be very, very complicated to really implement. So that's why the MiG 29s are clearly what makes sense for Ukraine right now to operate. And any country that still has some MiG 29s or old Soviet jet fighters, I'm in full support of Ukraine receiving as many of them as possible before receiving F-16s. But either way, F-16s are still going to be great, but it's a matter of time, and time is of the essence for sure. Uh, Putin is scared, and I only think it's just hit him what he has done. I think it hit him ever since February of 2022. It hit him. The fact that he's still not admitting the fact that this is a full-scale war. Instead, he says it's still a special military operation. He's scared of admitting that this is a full-scale war with Ukraine. As I've said, because he's also scared, or not scared, but he just is angry at the fact that he can't win. He can't win in Ukraine, right? Yeah, he got some territories. He managed to create a small land bridge between Crimea and Donbass, but I can't see Russia winning at all, right? They don't have the morale that the Ukrainian people have. Historically speaking, the Ukrainians have always had a very high spirit, high morale, an attitude that prevails anything that we have seen. Um, so I simply cannot see Russia winning this war. Yeah, he gambled and lost. And why he gambled? Well, because he managed in the last 2 decades to get all that he wanted without a single, with just a small slap on the wrist, right? Georgia, Chechnya, 2014, Crimea and annexation. All Putin got was just slaps on the wrists. And he said, well, pretty much is going to happen. The same is going to happen if I do full scale invasion with Ukraine, right? And he was wrong. And he gambled because he was so confident that it would be another slap on the wrist, that NATO would not be um, would be too divided to bother helping Ukraine. That the United States was just bluffing. But thankfully, that was all not the truth. And actually, everybody really got together to help Ukraine. Not as best as they could, but as well as they could. But I think that a year in, wow, it's January 23rd. In a month from now, about a month from now, it's going to be a year from this war. I can say with confidence that a year in almost, that the entire planet understands who needs to win here, right? It's never been clearer which side is good, which side is evil. Hey, Chris, greetings from Ottawa. Yes, thank you. Great Canadian capital of Ottawa. Think of the Afghani. Spirit wins wars. They don't call it the graveyard of empires for no reason. Yeah, Afghanistan has been definitely a graveyard for many countries. Yeah, for sure. Um, Also, Afghanistan was a little bit different. Also, their terrain was very harsh and difficult. Afghanistan is very, geographically speaking, has very lots of mountains, and the Russians were just getting picked on by them, by multiple ambushes. And it's crazy, guys. In Afghanistan, it was 10 years, right? Soviets invaded in 1979 and left in 1989, about 10 years or so, and 15,000 casualties in Afghanistan in those 10 years. In less than a year, and these are just, official numbers, they're also supported by the United States. But in less than a year, Russia has 120,000 dead soldiers. 120,000 dead soldiers. It's just astronomically high. You can't support a war like this, for many, many, many years. And these are the numbers that we know of. These are just the dead Russian soldiers. And usually the ratio that the military experts talk about is that for every dead soldier, there's about 3 injured or 3 wounded that are not capable of coming back or returning to the front lines in a nearby future. So we have close to 500 dead or wounded Russian soldiers at this point. It's massive in less than a year, right? What was the Russian military thinking? But again, the Russians are okay with that. They're okay with that. Yeah, Afghanistan is not Ukraine. You cannot compare these two countries. Yeah, no situation is the same. But again, the fact is that if we look at the numbers, it's just astronomical what Russia's lost in the last year. Isn't China helping Putin through North Korea? Yeah. Um, but I also think that China has a lot of interest in Russia losing at this point. They realize that they don't want to be on the side. But actually, I think that North Korea by themselves are actually deciding to support Russia by delivering weapons. But China has massive ambitions, right? I think that they realize that no way Russia is going to be winning this conflict. And China is very interested in snatching some territories from Russia, 100%. So I think they're salivating at the fact that if and when, I should say, when Russia is going to lose this war, their military is going to be completely defeated, unable to defend the territories bordering China. It's going to be interesting to see what's going to happen. Is China going to move forward and just quietly start snatching territories? Because let's not lie about it. There's a lot of disputes between China and Russia, small little disputes about territories and things like that. There's many of them actually. So I think that perhaps China is more interested now in Russia than Taiwan. Taiwan is another topic for another day, but I think that the Chinese officials are salivating at the potentiality of grabbing some Russian territories. Yeah. Hello from Winnipeg. Hello to all of you from Manitoba. Nice and cold Manitoba. I've been there once, and let me tell you, I really like Manitoba. But in the summer, one thing that I've noted when I did a quick stop in the summer was that there were so many mosquitoes. Oh my God. The black flies and mosquitoes were ruthless. Ukraine Canadian, how many Western tanks are promised to Ukraine so far? I mean, I don't have a list to be honest, but yeah, there's the Challenger 2s, Leopard 2s, hopefully. There's also discussion about the Abrams. Also, Morocco. Morocco. There was an announcement today, surprising, the very first African country that is going to send out help to Ukraine. Morocco has pledged to send T-72 tanks to Ukraine. So that was really surprising. What a great story. I mean, Morocco was an unexpected ally of Ukraine, to be honest. Never expected Morocco to come out as one of the very first countries in Africa to support Ukraine. So that is a great announcement. Even though, again, T-72s are old Soviet tech, Ukraine needs whatever it can get. What province are you in? I live in Quebec. Yeah, I live in Quebec. Um, Yulia, I am not in Ukraine. I live in Canada. China and India, China claiming all former Tibetan territory from the 8th century. Yeah, China has so many border disputes with India, with Russia. They have probably the most disputes with in terms of territories. I think there could be a massive list, but obviously China has very similar ambitions in terms of territory. They want to also be labeled as a massive superpower, and no better way than grabbing and snatching more territory, right, from weak neighboring countries. Yeah, so my family is actually from the city of well, first of all, Dnipro, so the city that is south of Ukraine, and then moved to Lviv, so lived a couple of years in Lviv before moving to Canada. So um, yeah. How many Leclercs? Leclerc. That's to be seen, right? The French have pledged also considering sending Leclerc tanks, but I don't know. I don't know. Yes, I do speak French. I do speak French, guys, but because it's an international chat, I'm going to be speaking in English, mais je parle français aussi. I like visiting Winnipeg when I lived in North Dakota. Yes, Vicky. It's an interesting province, and North Dakota is it where they have that famous a famous Rushmore, Mount Rushmore, if I'm not mistaken. And I'm totally could be totally in the wrong state. Sorry about that. Please tell us about Kremina and Dibrova. Any news there? For now, no. In terms of Kremina, the situation is still uncertain as to what's going on. Um, Honestly, the Ukrainians are trying to push there, but it's very, very difficult. And I think the difficulty lies in that the Russians have really poured a lot of defenses there. A lot of Russian soldiers are hiding in these forests that are covering, surrounding Kremina, where it's very easy for a defender to really defend that territory. And there's always reports and rumors that Ukrainians just took, a little part of that forest and this slow hill it doesn't make any sense for me to really report on that until we have visual confirmation that the Ukrainians are in Crimea. I think that for now we can say that it's pretty much at a standstill for now, and there is ongoing fighting in the forests by Crimea. But I'm very confident that in the nearby future, the next couple of months, we should have some positive news there. But it's also the winter. It's very difficult to maneuver in the forests. The ground that it's sort of like half soft, half frozen. It's just very terrible weather. And the first concern for the soldiers on both sides is to really conserve energy because you use up so much energy moving during the winter that it's just very, very difficult to really have these massive offensives. Yeah, I could tell from the first vids that you had a Quebec accent. Yeah. I have many different accents, but yeah, Quebec is one of all of them. North Dakota has all of the nukes. Oh, I didn't know that. Yeah, it's South Dakota. Sorry about that, guys. Yeah, it was South Dakota. I didn't know that. North Dakota has all the nukes. Should look into that. Can Ukraine retake the Zaporizhia power plant? Of course it can. There's no denying. Again, as I've said, as Zaluzhny said, not me, Zaluzhny said that they need hundreds of tanks. That's what is required. And I've said in my videos, but Zaporizhia is a different ballgame. It's not Kharkiv or Luhansk or even Donbass, the entire Donbass region. Donbass has a lot of hills, has a lot of forests, a lot of water bodies, rivers, and small little lakes, where offensives are easier because you're less detectable. In Zaporizhia, you're very detectable. It's all open Ukrainian steppes. Everything is open. And to mount an offensive, you need a lot more weapons, a lot more vehicles. And to get to Nerhodar, it will require massive amounts of manpower to get there. And also, the Russians are very well aware of that. So they've been building up a lot of defensives, as I've shown in Tokmak, in Polohe, all throughout the the gray zone between what Ukraine controls in Zaporizhia and Donetsk and what the Russians control. Chris, if you're ever in New Brunswick, give me a shout. I will. I have been there before in New Brunswick. I loved it. I went to different parks. I went to Campbellton, and then I was in St. John's and also Moncton. Really loved it. I really loved the Maritimes overall and Gaspésie. Gaspésie is one of those places in Quebec that I would highly recommend to all my viewers if you're in Quebec. I love Gaspésie. So yeah, the Maritimes is a beautiful Canadian place for sure. What's your prognosis on when this war is going to end? Honestly, guys, I have no idea, and I think that's the accurate response. There's so many factors at play here. Hoping that it will end by this year, but there's so many factors that we don't know of that could literally change everything within a second. And so the best military experts in 2022 were saying that Ukraine will fall in less than 3 days. Where are they now? Right? I knew that Ukraine would not fall in less than 3 days or even a week. I knew that. I didn't have a YouTube channel back then to prove that I said that, but I had a lot of colleagues that were very worried about the Ukraine situation before February that were telling me Ukraine is going to fall. It's terrible. What's going to happen to Ukraine? And I was like, it's obviously going to happen, but I'm confident that Ukraine is not going to fall in less than 3 days. So your guess is best as your guess is could be as good as mine. So I don't know. I hope it's going to end soon, and I hope that's going to end with favorable terms for the Ukrainian side. That's all I can hope for. Um, Is a lot of Ukraine power grid working better lately? Yes. Well, Ukraine's been getting a lot of good assistance from the West, right? A lot of countries have been giving transformers, generators, industrial scale generators. Important, very important, because um, the energy grid is very, very weak. And obviously, there's a lot of. I've had some. friends in Ukraine that were telling me that they need to ration electricity because it only turns on for a couple hours. It's terrible. And so, yeah, it's a critical situation right now. And um, for a country as large as Ukraine, it's very difficult to completely restore it in a very quick manner. And Russia has obviously continued their bi-weekly uh, attacks all throughout Ukraine. So unfortunately, the best the Ukrainians can do right now is just really live off generators and solar power and things like that. Unfortunately. And also, big shout out to all the electricians and all the people in Ukraine that are working on the clock to restore power to all the Ukrainian people. They also deserve so much respect from all of us because honestly, the rate that they're at the rate that everything is going on, you can imagine how much of a gigantic effort necessitates to restore power. I'm gonna be going on for maybe like 10 more minutes. I plan to do this for about an hour and a half. So I'll probably end the stream at about 6:30 p.m. if you guys are okay with that. Um, Let me know. Do I still have family in Ukraine? Yes, I still have some friends and family in Ukraine. That's why I'm so involved in making videos. I think that's the least I could do. I also send a lot of the money, the YouTube money, let's say, the very little that I get, to Ukraine causes. I really believe in doing that. And if you guys have any spare change or donations, please just find, Ukrainian fundraisers or, Ukrainian organizations that are set up to either assist the military or just people in need in Ukraine because that's really necessary. And yeah, would would you make a French why we should support Ukraine? Wait, let me see. I'm also in Quebec, maybe near you. French, and not many of people I know knows why we're helping. We'll see. We'll see. I like to keep it more international, but I think people in Quebec are very what's going on. I've talked to many people, and they definitely support the Ukraine cause. You know, the Quebecers are definitely a tough bunch on that point. I saw webcams bombarding, and 5 minutes later, firefighters appeared on stage, and there was still shelling. Yeah, the firefighters. A lot of people are also saying, it could be me as well. Why aren't you on the front lines, or even towards Ukrainian people that are not fighting in the front lines? Oh, why aren't you fighting on the front lines? Well, there's different ways that um, they can support this battle, and that's not only having a gun and going to Donbass to fight the Russians. It's also um, having some sort of normalcy in Ukraine, right? The medics, the nurses, the teachers, the policemen, the firefighters, the electricians, the people working in manufacturing, the weapons industry, all of them have a very crucial part. The war effort isn't just a soldier, it's also everything behind. And we need to understand that. And that also includes the informational war that is ongoing between Russia and Ukraine. And I'm very proud to say that I'm part of that, right? I really want, as much as I don't want to, it's not propaganda, but I also want to push as much of the truth as possible. And as I've said, I'm not denying here that Ukraine is winning on all fronts. Warfare is very dynamic; it changes. Sometimes Ukraine has the upper hand, as we've seen back in late 2022. Now, Russia's picked up the initiative. Right now, they're realizing that they need to grab some territory because they see that Ukraine is now getting a lot of equipment, and they're going to be mounting a counteroffensive. So now we've seen a massive offensive in Soledar, Bakhmut, in around Donetsk city, in Pervomaiske, Nevske, Makivka, I should say Avdivka, where they've just literally tried to push as far as possible, right, to make life complicated for the Ukrainians for counteroffensive. All that to say is that the war effort doesn't just include soldiers; it includes everything behind them. I volunteer at a Ukraine charity in Toronto, help relocating those that have come to Toronto. Yeah, thank you, Sir David. Yeah, that's also great, right? There's a lot of Ukraine refugees that move to Canada, and you know, that's also a reality of things. So the effort isn't just about going to the front lines and fighting. Yeah, everyone is a hero in Ukraine. We are the ones that are really enjoying the benefits of democracy, and in our comfortable rooms, drinking my tea. I'm drinking my tea, having a good time, having a live stream with you. But the Ukrainian people have shown such great sacrifice, such bravery. They're going to be painted and written in the history books as the most bravest nation, in my opinion, right? For what they've been able to do against a massive Russian horde. So, do you know the save rate for wounded Ukrainian armed forces? I heard it's about 90%, meaning 90% of the wounded survived. Yeah, unfortunately, I don't know, Kellen. I'm not sure about that. I know that the Ukrainian medics are doing the best. And Ukraine, the difference as well, one of the biggest difference between Russia and Ukraine is that Ukraine values human life. They value the grand majority of the commanders and the leadership values human life. Russia does not. Russia could care less if one of their soldiers was somewhere in the front lines, bleeding out, could easily be saved by medic. He's going to die there. Whereas from the Ukrainian side, there's going to be a whole operation just to save a soldier or just to save a civilian stuck on the wrong side, right? That's the main difference. And unfortunately, this comes at the Russian advantage because this lack of care for human lives means that they can throw as many bodies as possible. They can do their crazy operations, their crazy offensives in Soledar and Bakhmut, and not care that they've lost, in that one offensive, 100 soldiers. Whereas for Ukraine, this would be a massive, not only a massive, defeat in terms of morale, but also would not be acceptable for the Ukrainian people, right? There would be some outrage going on. So the Ukrainian side needs to tread carefully in that regard, whereas the Russians don't care, right? They're going to paint it as a great victory because they took 1 inch of extra territory on the Soledar front or something like that. Today we advanced 1 inch towards the Ukrainian side at a rate of 100 Russian casualties. Uh, inside Russia, told about a Ukrainian family that wants a sponsor in Canada. Yeah, there's a lot of Ukrainians that obviously are, moving to different countries in Europe and Canada. So thank you to all of you guys that have been assisting them wherever you are. I know my mom has been doing the same here in Canada. So yeah. Old Soviet cold, not caring thinking. Yeah, it's the old Soviet mentality, right? Winning by numbers. Why did they build thousands of T-55s, T-72s? They're garbage tanks, let's be honest, compared to what NATO has right now. The T-72s, the T-90s that have been modernized, T-80s and stuff like that. They're garbage compared to what the Challengers and the Leopards and the Abrams tanks bring to the table. They were no match. And the Iraq War was phenomenal, phenomenal place d'armes to show how effective NATO weapons can be against old Soviet tech, which the Russians still operate. They just slap some contact era extra armor on top of these T-72s, and that's it. They call it a modernized, T-72 tank. And I've also heard reports that the Russians simply um, cannot be on pace of building these new tanks that the T90s. They're missing a lot of crucial parts for the optics, for the armor, for the cannons, all um, the electrical pieces necessary to build these modern tanks. They don't have them, or they have very little of them, and so they're improvising by cannibalizing many older tanks in order to build their newer looking tanks. So things are looking very, very bad for Russia right now on that aspect. Yeah, guys, hit the like button. I had to end my original stream and create a new one because of the whole disastrous situation the first 8 minutes. That's gonna be funny. to look back on. But yeah, as I've said, sometimes you have to go through the hurdles, through the challenges to learn something. um, yeah. So let's hit a couple more questions before I end my stream. I hear Bakhmut units are at 30% strength. Do you think that is true? I don't know what percentage of strength they are in. I wouldn't be surprised if it's, obviously not 100%. It's clear as day that it's not 100%, but from what I've seen, and I live and operate in the same sphere as you guys. I don't have secret contacts somewhere in Bakhmut telling me that everything's all right or everything's bad. I operate in the same sphere of the news. I just, obviously have a couple of sources that I follow, but the Ukrainians are holding strong in Bakhmut. Um, and some people are downplaying the fact that Bakhmut isn't that necessary or important. I think it is an important town. It's not critical, but the Russians are trying to push through Bakhmut because it's one of the most populated areas and one of the most defensible areas for the Ukrainian army in that front. And as I've said, there's also a major train connection in Debaltseve, which the Russians obviously captured back in 2015 when they encircled the Ukrainian forces there. And why? Because there's a major train connection that connects many different cities in Donbass, which the Russians use to send their supplies in on the front lines, right? In Donetsk city, and so by pushing out the Ukrainians, that pushed them out from from the range with the HIMARS systems, the artillery systems, and it's very critical at that perspective. So Bakhmut is very important, but it's holding strong, and there is no, as far as I'm concerned, no desire for the Ukrainian leadership to withdraw because I think the positions are still strong enough to hold them. Hi from Portugal. It seems I arrived late. Did you guys talk about the defeat of Russians in Zaporizhia Oblast? I think I briefly mentioned it, but yeah, there was a funny video, as I've said not too long ago, that there was a platoon of Russian soldiers just storming Ukrainian positions in Zaporizhia, and they were effectively destroyed. Again, it was a suicide mission, and the Russians were claiming victory. We've just Orikhiv and Hulyapolye and all these, massive, these settlements. They're very important for the Ukrainians, but in reality, it was no visual confirmation. And now all we can see is that it's pretty much the same positional warfare that we've seen the last couple of months. It was just a suicide mission for the Russians. So no, they did not gain anything. It was a failed offensive for them. Let's hope for more of that. Yeah, yeah. So, as I've said, guys, I'm trying to give you factual information. I'm not trying to give you, just telling you that everything is daisy and roses, everything is going well for the Ukrainian side. There are losses, especially around the Bakhmut side, but it's important to also acknowledge that because, as I've said, warfare is dynamic. It moves. Sometimes one side gets the initiative and moves and advances. Sometimes it's the other side. So, to expect that Ukraine is going to be perfectly maneuvering and perfectly conducting operations just going forward all the time is a pipe dream. It's not going to happen, especially considering that the Russians have really committed a huge amount of manpower in the last few weeks to take back and take more territory within Ukraine. We need to consider that as well. Yeah, so that's it, guys. Thank you for tuning in. I was great. I apologize for the first 5-10 minutes. It was rough. I'm not sure. I'm going to need to test it out again. So hopefully, I'm not going to recreate the same situation. Let me know if you enjoyed the stream. Let me know if you want more of this, maybe nearby future. I'm not planning to do this very regularly, maybe once in a little while. I think it's a good way of talking with you guys. I apologize for all those that I didn't have the time to respond to. There's so many of you. But again, a huge thank you to all of you. Slava Ukraini. And you guys are the best. Thank you.